Everybody knows.
All right. We're at one past whatever hour you are living in. I know we're all in different time zones, but this is Kim McCleary, and it's great to see so many familiar faces now that we've had a chance to meet many of you in one-on-one conversations. And this is a great way to bring even more people into the preparations for the upcoming UnlockCTX meeting with the Food and Drug Administration. And Bob, I'll give you a chance to welcome the group if you'd like to.
Good. I'm thrilled to see everybody here. This is going to be a great opportunity for everyone to sit in with this CTX PFDD, and I'm looking forward to it. There might be some here. I'm Bob Rauner. I am the president of the United Leukodystrophy Foundation, and so I'm happy to have everyone show up today, and I think this is really going to be good preparation for the event that'll be happening September 14th. So welcome everyone, and I think Kim's leadership really has been doing us good, and I think I can turn it back over to her.
Great, thanks so much, Bob. We have been really fortunate to be working with Bob and Keely and Chris and the whole team at United Leukodystrophy Foundation since late December, early January, when this idea to apply for one of these opportunities for the CTX community to talk directly to FDA regulators and companies and drug sponsors working in the field of trying to widen and improve the options for treating CTX. And we're really pleased to be here now 8 months later, and just about 4 weeks off from having our actual meeting with the FDA. My colleague Samantha Mayberry is here, and we're going to kind of walk you all through a little bit of background on the Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative, and then we'll get into specifics about how the CTX meeting will be structured. And several of you have already said I'm in to help tell this really important, compelling story of what it's like to live with CTX and what more we've heard from the community needs to be, developed and created and approved to meet all of the many unmet needs that we've heard from so many of you. So with that, I think Sam is going to move over to the slide presentation. So we'll shrink down the number of boxes of seeing all your faces, but we do want you to feel free to use the hand raise under the reactions button, or to chat any questions or comments you have along the way, because we want this, like the meeting on September 14th, to be very interactive and participative. But for now, we'll just get started and provide you a background on how these meetings came to be, what their purpose is, and why CTX is such a good fit for this series of meetings that the FDA has been having. So Sam, if you'll go to the next slide, please, which I think is just the kind of overview. We want to cover what these meetings are, why it's important for FDA to hear from you, all of you, and how you can participate in this meeting. Next slide, please. So what is a patient-focused drug development meeting? And we'll probably slip into the acronym PFDD just for the sake of brevity as we move through this. But we're going to give you the background on why they call it this and what it's really intended to do. Next slide, please. So if we think about kind of the long, arduous process of developing a new medicine for a disease like CTX, it can take 10, 15 years, even longer. And there is, just sort of this winnowing process that happens if you look at this diagram moving left to right, where in kind of the early stage laboratories, which are mostly in academic university settings, there might be thousands of molecules studied to see how they interact with human cells and what their potential action on humans could be. And there's, zillions of candidates if you look at all those wispy white lines on the left-hand side. And then as compounds become better understood and they kind of move from left to right and go into early kind of preclinical studies with maybe primates and mice and other non-human testing, ultimately, if it looks like they could be safe and potentially effective in humans, they'll do some early stage clinical trials that are called phase 1 with just a few participants to see how the medicine interacts with the human body. And then, as more evidence is gathered, it goes into more and more patients with a particular disease to see how well that drug performs and what symptoms it treats, how it might alter the body's chemistry, and then ultimately gets over to the right-hand side where you've got just a few candidates making it all the way to being reviewed by FDA. And that kind of line with the one approved medicine. And until fairly recently, there hasn't been much of an opportunity in all those years and all those studies that go before something gets to the FDA for review. There haven't been too many opportunities for patients to really inform regulators in the US, Europe, and other countries about what their needs are, about what it's like to live with a disease, what symptoms and outcomes matter most to them. And FDA recognized this about a decade ago, back 2012. And they committed to creating new opportunities for patients to inform things much earlier than this sort of last step in the process. Sam, if you'll go to the next slide, please. So one of the, a few of the special considerations for CTX and why, it really matters for the FDA to understand what the experience of CTX is that CTX fits the criteria that FDA has established as being a rare disease, meaning there are fewer than 200,000 people in the US with this condition. And so it gets special consideration under what's called the Orphan Drug Act. So in that diagram that we just kind of walked through, that allows sponsors and life science companies to do smaller clinical trials with sometimes fewer steps in them so that they can really accelerate the process of getting a medicine all the way across all those orange, green, and blue steps. They also offer some incentives for life science companies and sponsors to develop drugs, because otherwise there may not be as much of an interest in developing drugs for a small population as compared to something like high blood pressure or more prevalent conditions. Important for all of you, and certainly part of your everyday lives, is the fact that CDCA or Chenodal is FDA approved for gallstones, but it's used in what's called an off-label indication for CTX, meaning any physician can prescribe any medicine for any approved medicine for a condition using their best clinical judgment. And I think it's pretty widely understood that Chenodal or CDCA is kind of the standard of care for CTX, even though it hasn't gone through that whole rigorous clinical trial process with CTX patients. So that creates some limitations, although you and your loved ones who have CTX can get access to that medicine because it's approved for another condition. It means that the developers and life science companies can't do any education. They can't tell doctors about CTX. They can't tell doctors about the potential for CDCA to at least provide some improvement and relief. And it also creates problems, as many of you have already experienced numerous times, that payers may not understand why they should be covering this medicine and reimbursing it. So, one thing that I know that the companies are working on is getting FDA approval for CDCA as a CTX medicine. There may also be some other medicines in development, and it's important for the FDA to have this background as those trials and plans come before them for review and approval. Also, one other point is that Chenodal or CDCA is recognized by FDA as a medical necessity. And so there are special provisions that regarding shortages. And I know some of you who've been in the community a long time have experienced some of those shortages. And this just helps make sure that supply chain issues are kind of cleared through quickly. Okay, that's the most technical information I'm going to share with you. Don't worry about memorizing all of it. It's not necessary. It's just more so that you have a sense of why we're doing this meeting and what the FDA's kind of interest in hearing from you is rooted in. But now we'll get on to maybe the more interesting parts of this. Sam, if you'll go to the next slide. So as FDA sort of undertakes their role in that whole process of developing new medicines, just a few kind of framing ideas for you to understand about what the FDA's mission is. They're really there to protect public health by evaluating the safety and effectiveness of new drugs. And they aren't there to decide, like, here's a disease that doesn't have a treatment or the treatment isn't adequate. Somebody needs to make a drug to address that. That's not a role that they play. That part of, you know, sort of the process of discovering new medicines is really left to academics and companies that specialize in developing new medicines. And those are called drug companies or medical device companies or life science companies. So the FDA doesn't design the clinical trials and they don't develop the drugs themselves. They're just there in more of an oversight manner. And then once a drug is approved, they're also there to provide oversight so that if any safety issues or new side effects arise as the drug is used by more and more people, there is kind of a check and balance on that. And also for some drugs, you can't watch daytime TV anymore without having to sit through a lot of pharmaceutical ads on your screen. The FDA, you know, makes sure that those are all done in accordance with, you know, whatever has been approved for the manufacturer to say about the medicine and the claims that they make. So those are kind of three areas that are important for you to know. And finally, it's important to know that the FDA doesn't have a role or in setting a price of a new drug or in regulating the price of drugs that are approved. That's really handled kind of outside the purview with insurance companies and Centers for Medicaid and Medicare. But it's important to know that the audience we have with FDA, while issues around pricing and access to drugs will come into the conversation at some point, they don't have any role in setting or determining the price that's charged. Sam, if you'll go to the next slide, please. So this new push that started about 10 years ago to bring patients' voices into the way that FDA thinks about and reviews new medical products started with a commitment for FDA to hold actually 20 disease-specific meetings where they would invite a particular disease community in to share with them the experience of what it's like to live with the condition, what are the symptoms that are most impactful on kind of the day-to-day life of a person with that condition, what are the treatments that they're using in the effort to find, you know, relief from their symptoms or long-term improvement, and ultimately, you know, improved well-being and function. And FDA learned really early on how valuable these meetings were. They recognized almost, you know, by the second or third one that they did, how much of just the context of a condition they were missing out on by not understanding it from the patient point of view. And so rather than just conducting those 20 meetings they initially committed to, they actually did a few more, and then they opened up this channel, this way for organizations like the United Leukodystrophy Foundation to be kind of co-hosts and collaborators with them so that they could have the benefit of more of these community patient-focused drug development meetings. And so that's the program that ULF and Bob submitted to, and that we now have the opportunity to participate in. And as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, and I had to just move my little box of your shining faces away from it, but on the right, you can see that now there have been just about 80 of these meetings conducted. And interestingly, about half of them have focused on different rare diseases. And some of them are rare, like CTX, and others are kind of big rare diseases like narcolepsy, for instance, that has almost 200,000 people in the US with it, but CTX being much smaller. So FDA has heard from large communities, they've heard from small communities like this one, and have really, really placed a high value on what they hear directly from patients, from family members, from caregivers, and from advocates from that community. Next slide, please, Sam. Some of the things that FDA has learned to date, and you can see I'm borrowing some of FDA's slides just so maybe they have more credibility in your eyes. I'm not making this information up. This is what they have told the community at other meetings like the one we'll have in September. And some of these seem kind of silly, but they were big learnings at the time that FDA started doing these meetings. They've really come to recognize what expertise patients and family members bring to the conversation about these diseases. They have recognized that what the patients and family members see as kind of the chief complaints, the things that bother you most, that interfere most with daily life, often are not the things that drug companies are looking at creating medicines to resolve. So there's this kind of mismatch. And we're hearing now from companies that where the FDA is saying, hey, we heard from patients that, sleeplessness is a much bigger part of this condition X, and you don't seem to be factoring that into your clinical trials. You might want to go back to the drawing board and think about how you're going to address that, because otherwise this treatment may not have much value to patients. They've also recognized that for progressive degenerative diseases, and CTX certainly fits that category when it's untreated, that many patients and parents feel like stopping progression is an important benefit from a therapy. And that was not something that they appreciated in the same way that they do now. They were often, holding maybe a sponsor to a higher standard, that you have to improve a patient's function in order for the medicine to be considered effective. But now they have recognized that stopping progression is in itself a valuable outcome in the face of progressive degenerative diseases. And they've also really embraced the reality that patients want to be as active as possible, that they want to have a voice, and that they want to share what they've experienced as a part of helping, bring about better therapy options, bring about more attention to their condition, and helping others in their community to live as well as they can. Next slide, Sam. So these are the steps that we have undertaken since first working with Bob and others at ULF to make this meeting a reality. As I said, in January, we submitted a request to the FDA to be part of this series of meetings, and had to, sort of establish credibility that we could pull this off. The next step in the process was being approved by the FDA in March of 2021. We got that nice letter saying, yes, this meets all of our criteria, and it looks like you've put together a good plan, and let's move forward. We did some initial sort of background planning leading up to the formal public announcement at ULF's Family Conference in June. And over all of these months, Sam and I have really had the privilege of speaking with many of you one-on-one to better understand your journeys and your experiences so that we could kind of weave together the whole community's experience in preparation for the meeting next month. Next slide, please, Sam. So I'm going to turn it over to Sam for a moment and give you a break from my voice.
So as Kim mentioned in the beginning of this session, the PFDD meeting really relies on your participation to share your experiences with CTX. And so today we thought we could just get that ball rolling a little bit and ask you to participate a little bit and get you thinking about the types of things that you might want to share at the meeting in September. So one thing that Kim and I have thought would be really important to highlight in September is just helping to bust some of the myths that exist out there around CTX. We know that there are a number of them. You all have shared them over the course of sharing those who we've had the opportunity to hear your stories. So if you could today, maybe just take a few seconds to think about maybe what you were told or have heard from other people that you know isn't true. And I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but so I'll just give you a second to think about those, and you can put them in the chat. If you don't see where that is, I'm going to just put a chat there, so a little notification will pop up. So you can type in your thoughts there. You can also jump in and share if chatting is not for you.
I'll just add that I've been told everything, and the information I've received has been very accurate. So I don't have anything to break when it comes to a myth or anything like that.
You're one of the lucky ones, Robin.
I know, it's been very fast.
I'm glad to hear it.
Well,
Sean,
the myth that I know about is that CTX is a adult onset disease, and so that is one I would like to break. This is Sue Stewart.
Great. Yeah,
Great,
Sue, you're thank you.
Hi, and this is
See
Shannon
Robin.
Duplar. I've not heard of anything that's false that I know of yet.
Good. I saw somewhere that diarrhea and xanthomas present an inconvenience to CTX patients, but those are really the most, problematic consequences of the disease. And I thought, oh man, just talk to a few patients, because that is not high on the list of things that impact their daily lives.
Yeah, I would like
Tom
to add.
Johnson, I'm calling. Oh,
Go ahead, Tom. Go ahead.
all right. Yeah, this is Tom Johnson. I'm calling just on audio, so I can't see the slides today. Calling for my wife, Deborah Johnson. We've been to a couple of the ULF conferences. And for us, it's not really a myth, but maybe a different perspective that really helped us was when we learned, and this was pretty late in our journey, we had always thought of CTX as a leukodystrophy, which it is. But when we started thinking of it in another way, another accurate way, as a bile acid disorder, a lot of things started to click for us. And we know that CDCA, now we know, is one of the two primary bile acids that every human needs. And for us, that was an interesting and helpful shift in perspective. So not a myth per se, but a perspective shift for us.
Really helpful, Tom. Thanks for joining in.
Yeah, thank you. Kathleen just shared in the chat, if everyone isn't able to see, that there just wasn't a lot of information about pregnancy and CTX, and she had 2 healthy children after being diagnosed with CTX. And Holly chimed in on the same topic as well, around taking medication while pregnant. And I'm really glad that you highlighted that. That's definitely something we want to make sure to touch on in the during the meeting.
I will add a third case to that. My daughter had my nearly 3-year-old granddaughter and took the medication during her pregnancy as well. So with also the advice to not take it. And I told her, absolutely do not listen to that doctor. You take the medication. So I did want to add to the comment regarding the diarrhea and xanthomas, how those are just, you know, they're the big inconvenience. And I have the luxury or privilege, if you will, of this is going to be my second round with the FDA to talk about this medication. And I was going back through my email and Sam, just as a quick follow-up, I'm going to respond to your email you just recently sent me, so it's coming. And that meeting was specific to an FDA approval of this medication in 2015, and we're still talking about it here in 2021. So that gives you an idea of where we are, where we've been, and where we still need to go. But part of the concern for me, and hopefully this is addressed, is that, and this isn't a myth per se, but just a topic I wanted to bring up in regards to this whole process, is making sure that when we are in this meeting, that we are in a room of informed individuals, not just the parents, but the people listening to us, because the issue we had during that meeting was that I didn't feel like they were informed, and they were really heavily focused on the diarrhea aspect of the condition, and in their mind, it wasn't that serious because it just caused an inconvenience of the diarrhea. They completely overlooked all of the other things that happened, the neurological deficits and things like that. So I just want to make sure that we all bring, you know, those tools with us to tell them about our experiences and make sure that they are absolutely aware that this is much more than a case of diarrhea or some xanthomas. It really is just, you know, it's very serious, and they need to, hopefully they're informed about all of that and they understand the full picture of the condition.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. That's such important institutional knowledge that you bring, and you're kind of the godfather of the CTX community. So thanks for being with us today. And John will have sort of the pole position lead off presentation at the meeting itself. But yeah, it's great that you can speak to maybe what the FDA understood back in 2015 about this condition, and I can assure you they will have a very different, more informed picture of it by the evening of September 14th with all of your help.
Excuse me, this is Shannon. I was wondering,
Hi,
I was wondering from John's experience, I mean, should we get cell phone numbers for each other? Like if it appears we have an uninformed panel, that someone will text and then we adjust our presentations, or we know for sure they'll be better informed this time?
They're going to be in listening mode, so I don't think we'll have to do any of that course correction. We're being very intentional and purposeful about how we've sort of structured the conversation, so we should be in good shape, but we'll maybe chat about that offline and make sure that everybody has a way to feed things back and kind of a, you know, sidebar conversation. It's one of the things you can't do in a virtual meeting, that you could use body language or
right.
So
if we were all in a room together.
Comment or question regarding that. Is there follow-up after the PFDD meeting? Is there something like, you know, other than the Q&A maybe at the end of it, is there additional discussion that might go on, or once the meeting's over, then they go off and they ruminate over their decision and what they've heard and then come back and they say, here's what's going to happen? Do we have any sort of ability to evolve what transpired during the meeting in any way?
They tend to really be in listening mode during the meeting, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but there is a report that will be sent to the FDA that Sam and I will be responsible for drafting, and it will include information from the meeting itself, from all of those one-on-one conversations, so that we can really make sure we cover the whole experience. And 4 hours will go by very quickly. It sounds like a long time, but all of you have lives worth of experience we want to take advantage of, and you've all been so generous, many of you have been so generous in sharing with us even deeper background so that we can bring all of that forward into the report that goes to the FDA. And we also have Bob and Chris and Keely and Sam and I have been meeting monthly with FDA and the planning up to this, and those meetings will go on a little bit past that. So if there are questions, we have a way to address those with FDA after the fact. And I know in some cases they have, identified something during the course of the meeting that they want to understand better, and then they've invited back some community members to just kind of help them, dig a little deeper if something comes up that they were previously unaware of and they want more information. Does that help, John?
It does. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Let's keep going. And we're capturing all of the great suggestions you all have in the chat. So that's tremendous. And we'll make use of that on the day of the meeting also. This is just another slide from FDA showing kind of how these town hall style meetings unfold. Obviously, the pictures that you see here are from, maybe what feels like a distant memory of when we would all come together in a room at the same time. We have a little bit of an advantage actually with the virtual setting, and that none of you have to get on an airplane and travel and spend the night in a hotel and, give up other aspects of your life to participate. We can do it fairly with minimal effort using Zoom and YouTube to broadcast the meeting. But we'll start with an overview. All of these meetings kind of follow the same format, where they start with an overview from an academic clinical expert, just to kind of ground the meeting in what are the presentations of the condition, how does it look coming through the doctor's office, and what do they generally use in order to treat the condition and help patients achieve the best function that they can. The next session will be devoted to kind of the symptoms and the daily impacts. And we'll have a panel of community members and then facilitated group discussion that will, involve kind of just a conversation just as we've had over the last few minutes in a similar format. And then we'll take a bit of a break. And then we'll come back for the last session, which is current treatment options. And we'll have, again, a panel of patients and caregivers, facilitated discussion on a few specific topics. Next slide, please, Sam. So this is the agenda for our meeting, and you'll see very close alignment with the FDA's preferred format. Bob Ronner will give some opening comments, and then we'll hear that short clinical overview, about 15 minutes long, from Dr. Barton Duell, who is at Oregon Health Sciences University. And I know several of you know Dr. Duell, and he might even be or have been your doctor at one point. And then we'll hear from the community. And the first session will be dedicated to living with CTX. We have 3 panelists identified, each of whom will deliver kind of 5 to 6 minute testimonies about their experiences with diagnosis and daily life with CTX. And as I said, we've been working very closely with folks to help sort of tailor each person's comments so that it touches on one aspect of the CTX experience, and that altogether it sort of shapes a more complete narrative. And then we'll have several discussion topics related to living with CTX. And each one of those will start with a community member perspective. And those individuals will speak just, very briefly, 2 to 3 minutes about something that is either a unique feature of their experience or something that we've heard over the course of many of these conversations. And then that same format of the 3 panelists and discussion topics will follow in session 2, when we'll move into the treatment of CTX. And then once we've had all of that dialogue, the FDA will sort of feedback, what they've heard and how they're going to, you know, apply the information and what they've heard from the community. And we'll be hearing those comments from Dr. Vijay Kumar, who is at the Center for Biologics and Evaluation and Research. Now, by no means will Dr. Kumar be the only member of the FDA there. He's just the only one with a speaking role. And we have a call with our FDA facilitator in the next few days, and we'll get kind of more information with him on how many people inside the agency are planning to participate and attend. And then we'll just have some closing comments to wrap up the day. Next slide, Sam. So in that first session about living with CTX, we had to kind of, you know, develop some themes for that facilitated discussion session. And these are the 5 sort of large topics. I mean, certainly the challenges associated with diagnosis are multiple. We have heard from some individuals who were surprised by the diagnosis of CTX. It came about as, you know, a consequence of getting medical attention for something else, and they had no idea that this was going to be a part of their life. We want to hear from people about what the most burdensome symptoms and the greatest concerns and worries are, and kind of goes to John's earlier point about the, you know, prominence of diarrhea and xanthoma in the FDA's minds. We want to bring them a fuller picture of all of the things that really interfere with day-to-day life and functioning. We also want them to understand sort of the impact on the individuals of independence, their schooling, work, and family life, and the family life of everybody in the family, whether it's a parent or a spouse or a sibling, and really touch on the mental health and behavioral challenges that individuals face and how that impacts kind of the whole family functioning. And then we'll have just a very short kind of update on newborn screening from Dr. Austin Larson. And that will be part of the conversation, because we know that the real hope is that CTX can get diagnosed even sooner than it has in the best cases that we have to share with the FDA from the community's experience. We know that those should not be the outliers. They should be more what we expect, this to be caught early and addressed very early in life. Let's take a look at the session 2 topics next. Oh, no, let's do something with Sam first. Sorry.
Just another opportunity to get you thinking about the kinds of things that you might like to share related to those topics that Kim just talked through. So, you know, challenges around diagnosis, around what is most burdensome in your experience with CTX or living with someone affected by CTX. So if you want to, again, just go ahead and put those initial thoughts in the chat. And this, you know, is sort of just a practice run. So you'll have a few more weeks to think about what else you might like to share at the meeting. But just to get some thoughts kind of flowing.
And this also helps Sam and I to develop kind of a discussion guide and make sure that we leave no stone unturned from what we've heard from the community when we're all together next month. Lots of great stuff in the chat. Why don't we move to the next slide, Sam, and people can keep adding to and building on others' comments.
Sounds good.
Real quickly, I do have another quick question. This is Tom Johnson.
Sure.
So as we come up with potential talking points, who should we get in contact with? Because I assume you want everything to be coordinated and kind of know who's going to be speaking on which things. I assume. So who would we contact just with the information we may have, so it can be decided whether or not that becomes a part of the main meeting.
Yeah, Tom, we'll follow up with you. I think we've got your email because you're registered for this meeting, if not the meeting on the 14th. So we can make sure to loop you in as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. So for the treatment section, these are some of the things that have come in to the conversations that we've been having. Just want to emphasize as much as possible that FDA is very inclusive of everything that people use to, relieve symptoms and achieve as high function as they can. So that includes the medicines, and obviously in the case of CTX, CBCA is the primary therapy, but we know many of you also have to take other medications, and for either consequences of the CTX or things that aren't well addressed by the CBCA alone. Several of you mentioned the surgeries that you had for the xanthomas. Supportive, complementary, and alternative therapies, including like mental health counseling and behavioral counseling, speech therapy, occupational therapy, massage therapy, rehabilitation for times when there's been injuries and falls and broken bones, and you have to get back to at least a baseline that allows you to function. So just it almost might be helpful to take some time between now and the 14th and just kind of catalog all of that, because we'll have an opportunity for that to be part of the record. We will also be talking about the challenges that are associated with dosing the primary therapy. And that's both as we've heard about as children who get diagnosed, during childhood or growing and their body weight is changing, and the dosing of the therapy has to be adjusted. We've heard from many people about just that third dose a day. It's hard to get in, and especially in that transition from teenagers to adulthood, it's really hard not to just be the nag about getting your kids to take their medicine 3 times a day, and then worrying when they're off more independent on their own, whether they're getting that. We've also heard about swallowing issues that make the dosing difficult, maybe, as a consequence of the condition itself. And then there's all the other access issues. The insurance company, decides they're not going to cover it anymore, or supply chain issues, or when it, was changing hands. So we want to understand not only what those challenges are, but what changes you notice in your family members or your own ability to function and do as best you can if you don't have access to the medicine. And as has already come up in today's conversation, pregnancy is a special time when things kind of can get thrown up in the air over not having maybe enough evidence for some OBGYNs to know whether they're comfortable with the woman taking Chenodal during pregnancy or becoming pregnant, and also how CTX factors into family planning. What concerns do you have either as a person with CTX about passing it on to a future generation, or whether you can have healthy children after having a child with CTX. So we want to talk about those issues as well. And then we do have some experience within the community with experimental therapies, which for, sort of things that aren't typically used for CTX, either under development or maybe used in other conditions with some hypothesis about why it might work in CTX. And we want to take a few minutes to explore that. And then we're kind of wrapping up this session on treatment with what are the remaining unmet medical needs? Where do sponsors and life science companies and academics really need to focus their efforts? What's missing? What are those gaps? and what would make a difference in your lives if, you know, you had different options. So that's a lot to cover in even, you know, an hour and a half of time, but we know that you're all up to it, and we'll get all that great information out to the FDA and the others in listening mode. Next slide, Sam.
And I know, yeah, I know many of you have already thrown out your thoughts around some of these topics. Earlier on, someone shared some unmet medical needs around mental health and psychiatric needs. Also shared some supportive therapies that are used, like physical therapy, focusing on nutrition and Pilates. But if there are other thoughts that you have now, you can feel free to share them. And as Kim said, I know this is a big topic, and there are probably things that will come to mind later on. So we just wanted to get you thinking about it.
And I just want to note, Bobby has made a comment in the chat about the difficulty of getting CBCA into an infant. And we are hoping that a mom with a 4-month-old baby who was diagnosed actually while she was pregnant will be able to join us just to share her experience, both with being one of the earliest patients diagnosed, her son being maybe one of the earliest in the US, and also just the challenges that she's encountering with the treatment of a newborn, because thinking about the potential for newborn screening to become more the norm, we have to be ready for all these things. So we're hoping that she's free enough to participate in the meeting. She's got a lot on her hands, obviously, at this time in her young baby's life. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So just to give you all a sense of who we have sort of engaged for some of these speaking roles, we have enlisted the help of a total of 16 CTX community members. And by no means, if you aren't one of them, should you think that you don't have a way to contribute. We are going to use a very participative style of having this meeting. So these are just individuals that sort of help get the conversation rolling, if you will. And of the 16, we have kind of a broad base of sort of their orientation to what CTX is, both with individuals diagnosed with CTX themselves, parents of children and teens, parents of adults, spouses of adults diagnosed with CTX, siblings. We have an adult child who is also the caregiver for her parent diagnosed with CTX. And then we have a couple of professionals who are also community advocates. And we've got people literally from across the US, England, Spain, Norway, within that group of 16. We have, as I said, the earliest diagnosis of a person represented by a speaker is someone a little boy diagnosed in utero. And the oldest person living with CTX among this group is 75 years of age. And we have several family clusters. We have people with mild impact, moderate impact, and quite severe impact on daily living. And across the spectrum with regard to how well the treatment that they have access to manages their symptoms, being, fairly effective and they feel like it's doing pretty well, to serious, urgent, unmet medical needs. And so with this, think of it as a quilt of experiences. We hope that we've kind of woven together a lot of the breadth of the community. And we'll have even more with the participation that we'll get sort of live and dynamic at the meeting itself. Next slide, Sam. So we're getting toward the top of the hour here. Okay, so just to give you a sense of sort of how the format will work, we've got, if you think of these concentric circles with those of us who will be in a studio just outside the DC area in a little town called Falls Church, Virginia, will be myself and Neil Odedera. And some of you have met Neil through the planning of CTX Alliance. And Neil's gonna come and be in the studio with Sam and me. Sam will be manning the phones and getting phone comments in, and we'll be sort of facilitating the conversation, making sure we stay within our time limit so we get to everything, and facilitating those discussion sessions. Then we've got our speakers that we've identified, those 16 individuals who will really kick off each of the conversations. And they are preparing presentations, short ones, on the key meeting topics, and also have the ability to participate throughout the meeting in the discussion sessions. And then we've got the discussion starters that will sort of kick off that conversation about pregnancy or about challenges in access. And they can also participate throughout. And then we've got this sort of band of folks in listening mode, and that will be the FDA staff, the life science company staff, and we have quite a few of them registered, any researchers or healthcare professionals. We have invited the members of the committee that oversees newborn screening to participate in the meeting. And there may be other communities that are thinking about having their own PFDD meeting that want to hear this one to see how it goes and what to, plan for and how to think about putting their disease in context. So they would also be in listening mode only. So it will really be an active conversation between these three groups, and then this one being sort of our audience. Next slide, please, Sam. And as we said, there are multiple ways for you all to participate, and we've identified the 6 panelists and the 10 discussion starters. We'll have polling questions throughout the meeting so that we can get kind of a quick snapshot about things like most burdensome symptoms and treatments that have been tried and used. We'll have an option for phone-in comments. We'll be able to use the chat function like we have today. And we'll even go old school and have email comments. And we'll be monitoring those closely throughout, and between Neil and I, kind of summarizing those and reading them aloud so that they're brought into the meeting. And as I said earlier, we'll also be able to take all of this and bring it into the report. Next slide, please. And the report itself, at sort of the end product of all of this, will include the meeting. We'll have the meeting as an end product, I'm sorry. We'll have the recording of the meeting as an end product for people to go back to and listen to, and maybe, chunk into more bite-sized pieces than listening to a 4-hour Zoom. And then we'll have this voice of the patient report that generally FDA likes to see within 6 months of the meeting to let things sort of marinate and saturate, and really provide a thoughtful and complete account of everything that was heard. And that will be a resource for FDA. It'll be a resource for the community, to companies out there, and hopefully will also maybe help frame what initiatives like CTX Alliance and ULF could undertake as far as new programs. I've seen in the chat, like more physician education. You may come up with some themes out of this meeting that really are important for physicians to better understand. And these are just 2 examples of reports that we have been, Sam and I have been responsible for issuing after these meetings. And one important thing too, as a final product, is just this opportunity, rather unique, for the CTX community to come together and express its needs and expectations for the benefit of all. We've seen how these meetings really become sort of a catalyst for other things. Hopefully it will help spur all the great work that so many of you have done to get newborn screening on its way. And there are, myriad other unmet needs that we've heard from the community across our conversations. And this meeting could really be sort of a kickstart for other things to come, for a way for you to identify where your own contribution and strengths are, and to also leverage others as well. So with that, I'll see if there are any kind of final questions before we wrap up. Comments, questions? Things you're excited about or anxious about?
If they don't have good results with this, like the FDA, you know, they say, well, they're not going to approve it, or my question is, will that be the end of being able to get the Kenadol?
Well, as long as somebody's still making it and it's still approved for gallstones, it shouldn't affect, you know, the existence of the medicine. And I also want to be sure you all are clear. It's not your responsibility to, this won't be the only thing that influences FDA's decision about Kenadol. There's, you know, a whole set of conversations that they are having with companies that make that medicine about it. And, you know, the evidence that they're providing from the studies that they're doing. This is just another piece of the story. And there won't be any immediate, you know, decision one way or another on this particular drug. This meeting is really intended to be kind of independent of a specific medical product itself, but more to help them understand the background of why it's important to have treatments for CTX, what patients want most in terms of the symptom relief and the, you know, stopping the progression and regaining some of the function that's been lost, all of those things, so that they have that as backdrop. Does that help, Robin?
I think it does.
Okay, good. Other questions?
So well, I can jump in there. So you said talks have been taking, you know, they've been taking time to do these talks or to learn about it. So in general, it's not just the Kenadol, you were saying other disorders and diseases too. Is it all in the leukodystrophy category, or that we're kind of
well,
talking to, or
they've had 80 of these meetings on many different disease areas, from you know, rare diseases to things like eczema and sleep apnea and depression. And so they're really, you know, sort of taking diseases where they know they have decisions that may be coming down the line in the next couple of years, or where there's a lot of product development, like something like, you know, small cell lung cancer. There's just a lot of therapies being developed. So they want to understand how patients view those therapeutic options.
So they're kind of aware of the topics that we're going to have. They're aware of some of the side effects or symptoms of a lot of these diseases. Then they know how they progress, or they know what kind of answers, you know, if they don't have the medicines to approve, they know that what will happen to the people if they don't have the medicines. I mean, they know all about these kind of things, right?
They know what they read in the literature.
Okay.
Some people who work at FDA are also physicians, and maybe, you know, before they went to work at FDA, they used to be a neurologist treating patients in the clinic, and maybe they've seen, you know, one patient with this in their clinical days. But this is really more to just sort of, you know, almost produce a documentary in real time about what it's like to live with this disease for the benefit of their learning. Yeah.
Okay.
So are these chats or the individual conversation starters, or what they're called, sorry, discussion starters, are they now 5 to 6 minutes each?
No, 2 to 3 minutes for the discussion starters. Yeah,
Sounds
the
much
panelists have a
I'd rather speak as shortly as time is possible. Okay.
Yeah, and the reason we had to put, time constraints is just to get everything in the, what will be a short 4 hours. It sounds like an eternity, but
Yeah.
it's 1 hour. Today went pretty fast. You can imagine how fast time will go. On the
I thought
14th.
your email stated 2 minutes about, and then I thought earlier I saw like 5 to 6 minutes. I was like, ugh.
Yeah,
But,
that's
okay,
for
so
the
that's probably
panelists.
group.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, the panelists. Yeah.
And then you said somebody would be reaching out to each one of us to I guess you kind of did, but are you actually going to talk to us and listen to what we have to say, or how's that?
Yeah, we'll follow up with you, Holly, today or tomorrow with more details.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Great.
This is Sue Stewart. I have a question. Are we ever going to directly address the question of the FDA approving Kenadol that would take a burden off of us, so we wouldn't have to worry about insurance deciding not to pay? I mean, is that ever going to be directly addressed?
Yes, that will come up.
That is the thing the FDA could most easily have control of, and it's an extra burden on our life that we don't know when our insurances are ever going to. Since it's not FDA approved for CTX, we never know when our insurance company is going to go like, oh, no, I'm not going to pay for it anymore.
Yep. Yes, that will definitely come up.
Okay, I was just wasn't sure if there was going to be any conversation about that directly, because that is something that can most likely improve in our lives. Okay,
right.
thanks.
That will come up. That'll come up under the access in session 2.
Okay.
Like with me, is it kind of like we're trying to convince them that they need to continue this medicine, or convince them that this medicine has helped us so much? I mean, is that kind of what we're doing?
I mean, it's part of the conversation. It's not the whole. Again, it's not a meeting about Kenadol or CBCA. It's a meeting about CTX.
Okay.
So that's a good distinction to maybe be really clear about. Is we want them to understand everything that goes into living with CTX, from diagnosis to treatment to getting the services, that you need, what's missing, even with, Kenadol and access to it. We heard from a lot of you that, there's other treatments that you rely on that things don't, it doesn't take care of everything. It's not the kind of one, what do they call it? Silver bullet, if you will.
Okay. That helped.
Well, and I think it's also important to identify that having an FDA approval of this does free up folks to publish literature, and it's really going to, I think, give a shot in the arm to the concept of awareness of the disease, because then you can freely talk about the efficacy, the safety, and be able to really, you can start to publish things and develop brochures and flyers to leave in physicians' offices, and also have more touch points across the different disciplines, whether it's gastroenterology, neurology, ophthalmology, and the various folks that might see CTX patient. I think it's going to go a long way to be able to help that aspect as well.
Great point, John.
If I can add something as a researcher in the field, I think that apart from the primary goal that could be, or one of the important goals that could be, to ensure that CTCA keeps being available, is the fact that the FDA is open to the development of other treatments with different mechanisms of action that could be in the future even better than CTCA, trying to address all the clinical manifestations. So that's why we are very enthusiastic about this meeting, because well, we are developing, for instance, gene therapy for this disease. It's still in a very early stage, but I think it's important that FDA knows about these initiatives.
Yes, really important, Ruben. Thank you for that. And it's why we've slotted in that experimental therapies and unmet needs toward the end of the meeting, is to make sure that that is one of the things that they're sort of, we close with, if you will, if this were, you know, a legal proceeding, and it's not, but we want to have a strong closing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, I see we've gone over our time, and I'm sure that all of you have lots of things on your agendas for the day, and we really appreciate you taking time away from those to be with us over this last hour plus, and look forward to seeing everybody back on September 14th. If you are one of the 16, you'll be hearing from us a number of times over the next few weeks, and if you're not, we'll follow up with Tom and I think Claudia, if I'm not mistaken, with that name, and maybe Kathleen. A couple of you are, yes, new names to us, but we want to get to know you in advance of the 14th. So we'll reach out to you with some follow-up opportunities.
Thank you, Kim and Samantha.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Great job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care,
Thanks, everybody.
You too.
Everybody.
Bye now.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.